because with internet comes social media. With social media comes all sorts of additional things, right? So people aspiring to a lifestyle that is far away from what they can actually achieve because it distorts the brain, right? You're thinking in dollars when your local currency is in naira, and then all of a sudden you're trying to.
Hello and welcome back to Source. Okay, this is a podcast created to understand, demystify African life and African people. Please help me welcome Shala. I am so honored and very happy to have someone with so much seniority and experience and knowledge on my podcast today. And I just know this episode is going to be very insightful. Please, would you like to introduce yourself?
All right. I'm so excited to be on Sorosuke podcast. I just love that title. Um, yeah, so my name is Shalosh Noiki, married with, I always say four kids, but I have three biological, and then my son got married, so that makes it four kids that I have. They're married, and I'm recently become a granddad. So, I mean, I'm sure we'll get into it more, but currently live back in the UK, having lived in Germany for 5 years, work in the HR technology space. Now I do mentoring, coaching, angel investing, working with startups, sitting on advisory boards. But I'm sure through the podcast we will get to all those things. So hopefully that's a good introduction at the start.
Yes, thank you so much. And honestly, kind of like prepping for this episode, like as soon as I would just type your name into Google, there's so many things coming up. Like your LinkedIn is so full of like different things that you've done in your more than 25 years of experience, which was very kind of like inspiring as well. And obviously you've gone through already. So, but your author, HR, technology, you started with teaching yourself how to code, which
Yeah,
is something that we kind of have similarity. I also work in tech. I also started by kind of just teaching myself how to code and then just get into like roles. But yeah, I think it's just your drive to accomplish things and drive that really inspired me and kind of I wanted to start there to when I was doing your research I found out that you're actually born in Nigeria, born here in the UK but actually moved back to Nigeria
yeah,
and then actually came here a while later when you're with your wife. So
yes.
I think one of the things that I wanted to ask you was kind of like how was that kind of transition from living in Nigeria to living in kind of coming here, living in the UK at the age where you were looking for a role, looking for a job.
Yeah. So just to kind of fill in the blanks, my parents came to study in the UK. My dad studied accounting in the UK, and after he finished, Nigeria was a place to go. So he went back to Nigeria, and I was 8 years old. So I think that was the first transition, right? So the first
Hmm.
transition was going from being in the UK, being in a certain type of school, then going to Nigeria and living in that culture and growing up in that culture. And I would say this that I never had any plans to leave Nigeria. I did my primary school, secondary school, university, did my national youth service, and I had no plans. Like it was not even like a plan B. It wasn't like, oh, maybe later I'll leave the country. I had a full mindset to stay in the UK. But actually, what happened was my fiance, because of the university school breaks, she moved to the UK. And when she moved to the UK, I thought, oh, okay, I've got a British passport. I might as well come to the UK. So that's how I came. I came for love. And then when I got to the UK, I studied civil engineering. When I got to the UK, there were no jobs in civil engineering, and I didn't want to go on the dole. So I thought, what job could I do? So I started working in security. Uh, Worked in security for about 18 months, thereabouts. And then I got lucky. I would say I saw a job posting on one of my security shifts, and it was for a graduate placement at the University of Manchester. So, and I guess the story continues from there. So I got into university, I did a graduate placement for 1 year, taught myself how to code, and then I went after coding jobs. So became an analyst programmer, and I just kind of navigated my career through that. What was interesting was at some point when I eventually got to GlaxoSmithKline. I'm leaving out a lot of time here, but I eventually started working in GlaxoSmithKline. And then when I got there, I realized that at that time, this was the late 90s actually, uh, almost early 2000. Jobs were going to India. And so because jobs were going to India, I thought to myself, programming jobs are the ones going. And they were outsourcing all these jobs. And so I pivoted to business analysts. Did that for a year. Then I realized, oh, that's also going. Then I moved to project management. And then I eventually settled in basically project management, program management, and then consulting. So that's kind of my journey. And I guess, part of that journey was rediscovering yourself. So having lived in the UK for 8 years and then left and gone to live in Nigeria and been used to a certain lifestyle and a certain environment, coming back to the UK, I think it was a little bit of a culture shock, whether environment, work ethics, and lack of work actually was all of a bit of a culture shock. But I think what helped me get through it was tenacity and desire and passion and, you know, not wanting to go back empty handed, if you like. And yeah, and I think it's kind of evolved from there, really.
That was super insightful, and I think that just gives quite a good broad understanding of kind of who you are and I guess your journey so far, which is really interesting. How do you define digital transformation? Kind of I've seen that through your profile and kind of like your stories that you work a lot on digital transformation. How would you define that firstly? And then I want to talk about kind of like digital transformation and the importance of that in Nigeria or in Africa more generally.
So I have a great example that I use for this, and I use this example because it's actually a true story. So it's not it's an example that I now use in all my talks when I'm trying to define digital transformation. So when I came into HR, which is a field I've now been in for about 25 years that you're talking about, so my total experience is about 30 years. But when I came into HR back then, um, you would have a personnel file. It was a physical file that had your application form, it had your letter of employment. Any pay rises you got was actually in paper form in a physical folder, right? And then in the office of HR, you had these filing cabinets that was sorted by alphabetical order, A, B, C, D. Like, so if they're looking for Shola, they will go to they either sorted by first name or last name. And so that was HR. That was how HR was almost 30 years ago. Everybody had a personal file. So if you ever hear the word personal file, that's where it came from. It was a physical file that had everything about you in. And then over time, what happened is that digital transformation came into the HR space where we took those paper files and back then, the first thing we did was we OCR'd, which is, you take basically, we call it we scan the documents and make an electronic file, right? And what's happened over time is that that electronic file has led to systems being developed that means actually paper you're becoming paperless if you like. So now if you want to apply for a job, you don't have to send a cover letter in the post with a CV in the post and wait and pray that it gets to the company and then they open it and then they put you on and they call you back, right? Now you can literally apply for a job in seconds. And that's, if you look at that industry, the HR industry, which I've been part of, you can see how digital transformation has taken place. And a lot of graduates today wouldn't even know that back in almost 30 years ago, you had to actually post your application for somebody to receive it or fax it, right? So that's part of the change that happened. And when people started having faxes, then you could fax your application. But now you can just go online. We don't even think about it. In fact, you don't even need a CV. You could just click, use my LinkedIn profile, boom, you've applied for a job in seconds. So that's digital transformation. That is how you're going from a paper-based system to a completely um, paperless kind of industry. And one of the companies I worked with was Deliveroo, and we actually achieved from the moment you apply for a job to the first day you enter into the company to actually pick up your laptop, there was no paper, zero. So you apply online, we invite you for an interview online, you do your interview, you come in, you get the job, we send you your contract in the by electronic file, you click on it, you sign it digitally, it comes back to us, we send you a confirmation, we send you like there's no paper until you actually physically walk into the building. And I think that's digital transformation in the HR space. Now, let's broaden that out to, you know, 10 years ago, maybe, yeah, 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, if you wanted to really find out information, you had to go to your nearest library. And then you go into the library, maybe request a book. You have to have a library card. You get the book out, then you can study it. Now you just Google it. That's the difference. You know, even if you start like I think that's how I define digital transformation. It is
Yeah.
transformation of mundane activities and on not so mundane activities into a digital footprint that
Mm-hmm.
leads to that has led to on-premise applications to now in the cloud applications to now AI applications, and I think we're it's a exponential growth of the ability to do things in a great in a different way. And I will finish with this before you ask the next question, which is we were always on this journey of digital transformation across the globe, but then when COVID hit, I think we went 10x or 100x. I don't know what the number is. I'm sure somebody has a number somewhere. But it really kind of accelerated um, this whole digital transformation because all of a sudden we were now remote and now we had to get work done. And to get work done, you needed technology to make work happen. And I would say HR was one of the last areas. HR and medicine were one of the last areas where this took place, but now it's all kind of accelerated. So when you're thinking of digital transformation now, there's no space that's left. Digital transformation is happening everywhere now. Yeah, does that help in terms of
Yes.
exemplification?
Yes.
I mean, I know this is your podcast, but I'm going to ask you a question.
Yeah.
Sorry. So, how would you define digital transformation? Because it's good to kind of get a balance. So,
Mm. Honestly, I totally agree with kind of like how you described it. I think when you, but I think when you first think of digital transformation, we often think of it just kind of, for example, you have a website and
yeah,
I'm just like editing your website, making it better. I think sometimes we minimize the impact and the significance of what digital transformation does. I mean, I work in tech, and sometimes when you think of that, you might just think, okay, you a client has a website, let's turn it into a mobile application. So now they have an app as well.
yeah,
But when you, I guess, when you really broaden it up to, okay, this is how it was and how it is now, you really see the transformation bit of the word and you really understand that. I think I completely, again, what you said completely makes sense. But I think, yeah, because you really broaden it. But I think sometimes I would do, or myself tends to minimize that word of transformation. It doesn't just mean, like artificial intelligence or
yeah,
like improving a website, but it's really the journey that it's come from and where it's going to, and it's kind of
yeah,
like continuing, still.
yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe one more thing, one more example, because I'm sitting here thinking, when I started teaching myself programming, then I got lucky and my company wanted to send me on a course for programming. You have to physically leave the office and leave the company for 5 days to go to a physical location to learn how to program because there was no YouTube,
Mm-hmm.
right? There was no YouTube, there was no Google. And now today, literally you can Google it, you
Yeah,
can
you can do
YouTube
it
it,
at home.
you can ask AI to write you a course for what you're trying to do. Not just do a course, you can actually get AI to write the course for you and then do the course yourself. I mean, that's the world we live in now,
Yeah.
and I think it's only going to get more and more like that.
Mm. And you've defined this really well, and I think the reason I wanted to talk about the definition and really understanding what that means is that I now want to kind of relate it to um maybe like Nigeria specifically, but you can talk about anywhere really, like in Africa in general. How does digital transformation impact the nations there, the organizations there? And I guess then you need to talk about infrastructure as well.
Yeah. So I mean, I think again, you learn from me. I like going broad, then coming down specific. So if we go broad, I think as of 2024, internet penetration in Nigeria is about 48%. Right? So 48 over 200 million people thereabout have some level of internet access. Mobile phone penetration is way more than that. I think there's about 2 million active mobile connections. 200 million, sorry, 200 million active mobile connections. So technically, on paper, every single household has one mobile phone, but it's not really true because when you go into the rural areas, it's not calculated like that. But what it means is that in Nigeria, for example, a lot of people have one or two mobiles. Most people would have a dual SIM. Like I think Nigeria and India sell the most dual SIM phones in the world because if you go into you don't go into a shop in London and say, "Can I have a dual SIM?"
Yeah.
They look at you
Right.
funny, like what you. I
What
mean,
do you need it for?
now iPhones have come out with this eSIM, so it doesn't really
Mm,
matter. You can have multiple SIMs. But before then, in places like Nigeria, most people would want a phone that had a dual SIM because they need to have a backup for the internet connectivity. So I think the first thing is to say, with that level of penetration of internet and that level of mobile phone connectivity means that there is a rising mobile middle class. There is
mhm,
a rising middle class, and those people are now being serviced by companies like, if you've heard of companies like Jumia, Konga, so the Amazons of Nigeria. And
mhm.
actually, to that effect, Amazon is now about to launch in Nigeria, and start delivering packages in Nigeria very, very soon. I mean, Amazon Web Services is already there, so it's just a matter of time before you have an Amazon on the ground. But actually, last week, for example, Timo launched in Nigeria, right? So can you begin to see that, people would say, oh, Nigeria is hard to do business in because of logistics. Well, if Timu can do it, then anybody can do it, right? And so I think what's happening in Nigeria and Africa as a whole, like I've been privileged to travel to about 20 different African countries, and I can see as I cross Africa that the power of the internet, the power of the mobile phone is allowing this digital transformation to take place. Now, if you think of Nigeria specifically, and you think of internet, and you think of businesses, you think of Flutterways, Paystack, Opay. These are billion-dollar companies. And why are they billion-dollar companies? Because they come with a payment gateway that enables this infrastructure to begin to work in Nigeria, to begin to allow people to order food, order things that I don't know whether you heard recently about the South African Nigerian war where people were ordering boats, taxis from South Africa in Nigeria, and Nigeria was doing the same. It was a terrible experience, but it also shows you how powerful digital is now. Like, could you even imagine ordering a taxi from London, which you can do now? I can actually order an Uber in Lagos to pick up my sister and take her wherever she wants to go,
Okay.
right?
I
That
did
that
not
is
know
that
that.
is the power of digital. I can
Mm,
order food from my desk in the UK and get that food delivered to my parents.
mhm,
I can get them groceries delivered to them without getting a third with any of my family members involved. I can just say, "Hey, my parents need some Gary." I can actually just go online and book it, pay for it, and it's delivered to them,
mhm,
right? And so when you start looking at Africa and Nigeria, I mean, these are things that we don't blink an eyelid about. If you're sitting where you are now and I want to order food for you, I can do that on my Deliveroo app, right? It's easy to do. But now we're saying the world is so dynamic that you can actually do this cross country. You can order things cross country, pay for things cross country, move money around cross country. And I think these things, coupled with more internet penetration, coupled with mobile access. Even in Nigeria, there is a plan for 2025 to broaden out the broadband. I think all these things are making the play and the stakes ready for full blown digital transformation, right? We know the stories of Africa being the most populous country in the next couple of years, and for that population to be active and working, they would need access to internet and etc. And I'm sure you've heard of the story of Andela, a company that was based out of Nigeria, sending talent working abroad. And actually now, I mean, how many talents in Nigeria are working remotely? And
Mm,
there's so much, right? And it's not just Nigeria. Like it's Kenya. You heard the story recently about Kenya and the AI and how they were the ones doing all the, the LLM learning for ChatGPT. So I'm just saying that Africa is coming into the game, and it's because the things that we learned in school, globalization, digitization, internet penetration, are now realities.
mm,
They're not things that we hope for. They're not Star Trek or Space 99. They're actually happening now, and I think all of that is impacting the landscape.
mhm, mhm. No, thank
You
you
got me.
so much.
You got me on my hobby horse. I like talking about this.
No, it's really good because I honestly really do as well because I do enjoy kind of like the opportunity that tech can bring. But on the same coin, there's also some of the threats and so therefore some of the weaknesses that technology can also bring. And I think just on that point, do you think there is any threats or things that we should be careful about or worried about with the digital transformation pace happening in Nigeria or in Africa?
So uh, I think with everything there's pros and
Mhm.
cons,
Yeah.
but I think from my point of view, the biggest cons is more to do with social media,
Hmm.
right? Because with internet comes social media. With social media comes all sorts of additional things, right? So people aspiring to a lifestyle that is far away from what they can actually achieve because it distorts the brain, right? You're thinking in dollars when your local currency is in naira, and then all of a sudden you're trying to price, get paid in that currency or spend in that currency. So I think that's definitely a negative of globalization and opening up of the world, because things that you probably wouldn't have cared about before, you wouldn't say the word Bugatti because you wouldn't even know what a Bugatti was. But now all you need to do is go into social media, type in Ronaldo or somebody famous, and then they've got a Bugatti, and then all of a sudden, that's now your new aspiration. And to do that means you have to do some things that are not right, right? And I can say this because I'm Nigerian, and you are too, right? So
Yeah.
the 419 experience, right? Because of the accessibility to email, people trying to con people in the Western world, etc. So there are some vices around this globalization and digitization. And, you know, as there's a positive of me being able to order food in Nigeria, there's also now a possibility for me to do fraud from, you know, the most remote part of the world and, pretend that I'm somebody else. And then
Mm,
with AI, I can now do voiceover. I can do all sorts of things. I can create images. I can present myself as a Caucasian if I wanted to, because I'll just put a filter on my face and change my voice, and I can just put in a filter, changes my voice, changes my color. And all of a sudden, you think you're talking to a guy who's sitting in London, but actually, I'm sitting in, a broken down building in Lagos, right? Potentially, right? So I think there is that vice, but I don't think it's an overwhelming vice, right? The same way, people could get killed from car from a car accident. Do we then say nobody should drive anymore?
mhm,
What we do instead is say, let's have the right security, let's have the right risk management, let's have the right protocols, let's make sure that the right things to keep people safe. One, so there are many negatives that I don't want to even spend time on it, but there are many negatives that can happen from access to the internet, etc. So let's try and keep people safe. Let's try and keep people's data safe. Let's keep the infrastructure safe, and let's make sure that we are using digitization in a safe way, right?
Mhm.
Because I know everybody wants to define safety, but we're all individual human beings. So what is easy for me to identify as a risk might not be easy for you to identify as a risk. So it's being aware that at the end of the day, all this digitization, AI, VR, AR, we're still interfacing with human, and that's why if you begin to do a lot of studies in the last 2 or 3 years, the people centric, human centric concept around AI, concept
Yeah.
around internet is coming about. So
Mhm.
I know that's a long answer, and what I'm trying to get to is there are so many positives from
Yeah.
digitization. There are some negatives, but I think if we use a good balance, we'll
Mhm.
be able to allow this to be positive. And let me just take one thing, because as I'm talking, it comes to my mind. If you think about healthcare, right? Healthcare, um, the fact that now um, my mother-in-law can get her medication delivered on the day she needs it through me ordering it in the UK using a Flutterwave and OPay, getting a delivery guy who is in Nigeria to deliver it to them on time at a time, potentially could save her life over and over and over again. And making sure that the drugs she's taking are certified drugs. Like having that ecosystem in play just means that there's a lot of good that can be done. And I think we should try and focus on that good and leverage all this automation, AI, VR, digital to do good to humanity.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that again. I will say, like, you've mentioned a lot of things that I wanted to kind
Yeah.
of like go on
Okay.
to. But
Yeah.
you said, about the benefit, right? So let's focus on that. And I wanted to, you've mentioned that actually Amazon is opening up in Nigeria and Temu as well. But
Yeah.
one other benefit, obviously, of digital transformation and an improved infrastructure is that smaller organizations are now able to start up a business and kind of start earning money with their own inventions and ideas. So, one other thing that kind of came to mind is that yes, the benefit of improved infrastructure and digital transformation is that, like you've mentioned, a dispatch rider can bring the medicine to your mother-in-law. But now with Amazon delivery or Temu, for example, these jobs would then now kind of be given to larger organizations like Amazon. What do you think kind of like the I guess the principle or the way to kind of move about this is kind of like the best way to do that. So, there is a benefit to smaller organizations to now increase and create a business easier than it was before. However, because of globalization, there are now bigger organization taking that kind of like targeted audience.
There's two ways to answer that or to look at that, and I probably using a bit of privilege because I'm in the industry, right? So Amazon coming to Nigeria means that Amazon is going to hoover up these small businesses, because actually the biggest thing that sells on Amazon, remember, is Amazon Marketplace, right? So actually Amazon is not in the business of deploying 100,000 dispatch riders in Nigeria. He's going to actually have to work with local communities, work with local marketplaces, because we're not in that world of go and colonize, right? We're not. People are not. Amazon is not trying to colonize Nigeria's market. It's trying to work with the locals that are in the market, pull them onto its marketplace, get them to do the distribution, and then cream a profit, right? So that's the first thing. So yes, as much as there will be some take over by these large organizations. The reality is that the more distributed, we're more global local these days than global global, right? It's not like before where a global entity comes in, lands an embassy, and then all of a sudden operates from its embassy. Actually, for these things to go faster, quicker, they need to localize some of these global concepts. So that's the first thing. So I think there is a bit of safety in that. So it almost will create jobs by itself. It's a self fulfilling prophecy. So some people will miss out. But the flip side of that is most of what Amazon will be doing, most of what Timo will be doing, will be in urbanized areas. So if you go to Lagos, Abuja, Ibadan, Benin, right, you can count how many cities they're actually going to really, really operate in. And then after that, they scale back. And so what that then means is that locals can do that last mile delivery, right? They can do that. I've got it to a port in Lagos, but how does it get from Lagos to Songodeto? So like some remote distant place that actually no cars can get to in reality. So I think there is I call it a small risk of big players coming in and taking over the market. I think the bigger risk is that we, the locals, get so pulled into what is happening in the urban cities that we neglect the rural areas and or the less, because they're not. I'm not even just talking about big rural areas. I'm talking about smaller cities, right? So even in Lagos, everywhere in Lagos is not as developed. Everywhere in Lagos doesn't have the best roads. Everywhere in Lagos doesn't have the right power, and so I think what it should help us do is to focus on those areas that a multinational is not looking at, because it's not the numbers, it's not the size or scale they want. And so, therefore, I think the advantage comes for people who are looking to serve the underprivileged, right? To serve the rural areas. And hopefully in 2050, 2060, our rural areas, quote unquote, will be less, right? That electricity will get to everywhere, internet penetration will get to everywhere, because the big cities are taken care of, but the smaller places where the opportunity really is are not taken care of, right? There's still, you know, lots of places to penetrate, and that's just
Yeah.
Nigeria. But when you go across Africa, you realize that infrastructure development in Africa
Mhm.
is limited, right?
Mhm.
I would say in my travels, I would say 20% of what I've put my foot on in terms of countries is infrastructure ready, right?
Mhm.
There's an 80% that is not.
Mhm.
And that 80%, in my mind, creates the opportunity for development, the opportunity for innovation, the opportunity for transformation. This transformation that we're talking about that seems to be okay to some degree. And I always like to throw this joke out, just and maybe this dilutes the conversation, but you can Google this and Google how many companies in Germany still use a fax machine. It's 89% of companies in Germany still use a fax
Wow.
machine in 2023. That's the
Is that the
state. That's what
highest
Google.
in Europe or?
I don't know what is the highest in Europe, but
Mm.
but you have to think about it that, oh my gosh, in Europe, the largest economy in Europe,
Mm. That's great.
89% of companies still, to some degree, fashion or form,
Yeah.
still have a fax machine operating. I mean,
Mm.
there are people that are going to listen to this podcast and they're going to have to ask their colleagues what is a fax machine, because they've never seen one, never even heard that word
Yeah.
before. But I'm just saying that as much as there's digitization, as much as we're going to this to the moon and we're going exploring space, we haven't fully
Mm.
explored what's possible, and
Yeah.
that's a very, very developed Germany.
Yeah.
So dial that into a Nigeria or a Mali
Yeah.
or a Malawi or a Niger, and you will see that the
Yeah.
opportunities for better development are way more than we can even imagine.
Yeah. Just on that point, what areas could you, if you had to say, needs the digital transformation, the real transformation, the infrastructure development? Could you say like
I
specifically?
think government
Mhm.
parastatals across, and I can say this generally across the whole of Africa, needs to get a bit more digitization. I think that um, ideas where we start to use, because remember, as much as we're talking about digitization, there is the, I didn't talk about this in the negatives, but there is the global climate, green energy, all these things still have to come into play. But actually, where else in the world could you get a better advantage of using green? Where else could you use better solar? Where else could you use better water? There's a guy that I saw the other day that is creating electricity from creating some kind of water system in his house that actually creates a small dam, and he generates his own power from his own house. We know of wind turbines in Africa. They don't have to be as big as we see them in Europe. They can be smaller because of the natural occurrence of wind. So I think there are many areas, and I think I've generalized, but I think if we start with government, right? How do I make things easier for people to do things better? Then look at healthcare. How can we transform the healthcare better? The old company I used to work for, we invested in a company that does drone delivery of medicine across West of South Africa, so into rural areas, right? So, so this is where you can begin to see like all this technology we know works. Why don't we use it to do some really good stuff in places where it's very hard to get to because the roads are bad, but you can put a drone in flight and and get medicines to places. So I think so. Let me try and be a good boy and answer the question. I think government, I think healthcare, I think green energy, energy production in a good way, and then leveraging the natural. How can we digitize some of the natural things and begin to think deforestation like they're doing in the Amazon, and not completely take all the minerals out of the ground, and really think about Africa for the next 50 years rather than deplete its resources, right? You couldn't go into the Amazon and start cutting trees down. There'll be a revolt. There'll be screams. There'll be shouts. So how do we do that same thing? How do we use technology to manage those risks and use our ability to see into the future using AI and all these things to kind of start predicting to say, actually, if we keep doing this in this area, 50 years from now, there will be no land left for people to live in. And start using technology to really begin to inform the narrative and the story of what's happening on the continent.
Thank you so much. That today's conversation, I hope for yourself as well. I really enjoyed it. It was really insightful, and I think you know through your experience, you can really see the passion and the knowledge that comes through. Kind of like one of my last question, I always like to ask, what is one action point, one thing that you would like the listener to do after listening to your to this episode, or one thing that you'd like them to kind of look into? What would you say?
I'm thinking about it because I want to make sure I do it well.
Yeah.
Um, I've been chatting so far away. No, I think my one action would be for people to take time to think about what legacy they are leaving behind in all the actions that they do, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if I was speaking to Africans in diaspora, I would say to them, what legacy are you leaving for the continent that you came from? For those who are living in Europe or in America, what legacy, what are we leaving behind? Like, because everything I've told you these stories today are things that kind of have evolved and have been left behind for us from the generations that have gone by. I think I would want everybody who's listening to this to think about what legacy am I leaving behind? And legacy doesn't have to do with age or how
Mhm.
old you are, how well or long you've worked. It's almost like starting with the end in mind. Like when I'm done, whatever done is, what do I leave behind? What footprint do I leave behind? What impact do I leave behind? And I think that for our generation, for this time of the world, I think everybody is so consumed in the now, in the next 12 months. But I think to preserve a world that's going to be better, I think we begin to think in what's going to happen 50 years from now. I was talking to a lady who's designing a product, and she's like, I really, really hope that 50 years from now this product will still be used. That's a different thinking. People don't think like that. People are thinking about now, what I get now, what I eat now. But I think if we're going to build a lasting world that is enjoyable, then we all have to start to add that aspect of what impact, what legacy am I leaving behind. Maybe
Thank
it's
you
my
so
age
much.
speaking.
No, honestly, that was super, super good. I think anytime you hear the word legacy, you just think, oh, that's very serious. But it's really good and important. And honestly, just to round it up, I really enjoyed this conversation with you. And one thing I would like to add is that I really enjoy how approachable you are. And I think
Thank you.
sometimes when it comes with seniority, knowledge, experience, sometimes people become more closed off, busier, and just more unavailable because they're just busy. But I really appreciate how approachable and personable you are, and you've given me this time to spend this time with you, and we recorded this, and hopefully other people listening also take one thing, two things from what you've said, and work on it, even think about it, Google it. But it's been really great. Thank you.
Can I say one last thing?
Yeah.
Because I think just as you said that, I realized actually what you said as a compliment to me came because I had good mentors and good coaches around me,
Mm,
people who invested in me. And, I reflect now on the whole conversation. I didn't talk about that, but I think I will end with that, maybe if that's okay, to
mhm,
say actually I was able to achieve all I achieved because on my career journey and in life generally, I've had very good mentors, very good
mm,
coaches, people that taught me by example. And I think who I have evolved in today is because of people who I had access to, very senior people who did their very best to pull me up when
mm,
I was very, very low, very, very down, very, very not even in the running, and give me opportunities. So I think making sure you have that mentorship circle, a coaching circle, is going to be very, very vital. It was vital for me. And, I sit here and I receive your compliment, but I know that I can't receive that without reflecting that actually mentorship and coaching really helped me to become who I've become.